Hi, Happy New Year, everybody. Okay, so we're back. I hope that you all had a good holiday, if you had one, and a new year that was enjoyable with people that you love. Hold on, I feel like I'm crooked. I'm just adjusting this. So, I want to thank you all for all the lovely birthday wishes. I didn't make a post for my birthday this year because I feel like I made a post right around my birthday anyway. But thank you so much for all the birthday wishes. It's really meaningful. I'm a little sick, so I'm a little snotty right now. But that's okay. That's what happens when you've been around children a bunch. Okay, so I have a couple of housekeeping things. I have a list. So for Mad Women's Library, which is a book club that I started with Heath, it's called the Mad Women's Library, and we have a Fable. And if you want to join, it is now private. So you have to DM the Mad Women's Library or Heath Amodio, and you can be allowed in. And it's a wonderful place. We talk about books, and there's a beautiful community there. And we just did in December a book by Catherine May called Wintering. And to close that whole thing out, I'm going to speak to Catherine May on January 16th at 10 a.m. Eastern here in this Instagram live space. So join us or watch later on. It should be really interesting. She's a fascinating woman. And I think that is it. For February's book, we'll let you know earlier what it is, so you have time to collect it. It's not an obscure book, but it's maybe not everywhere all the time. And this month's book is exciting because it's been on my TBR forever, and it's been sitting on my bedside table even for months on end, and I've never done anything but read the first few pages. There's a gorgeous film adaptation of it, and it's written by Kazuo Ishiguro, whose books are fantastic, and I've read two of. I've read Clara and the Sun and Never Let Me Go, and both of those books were gorgeous. So, January's book is, that's very shiny, The Remains of the Day. And I will say that trying to find an excerpt at the beginning of this book to read was a wee bit of a challenge, because the character is grappling with identity and has a really strong internal process through which he filters the world. And so when he thinks for a long time, and he has to move through all these hurdles. And so when he's thinking of one idea, that idea spans quite a chunk. So I picked just after the prologue, the first section. So he's gone out on this big deal for him kind of road trip with a purpose. And it's like the first time he's really left his workplace, which is also his home. And this takes place, the beginning of this book, the prologue is in July of 1956, just to position you, and we're in England. Okay. Tonight I find myself here in a guest house in the city of Salisbury. The first day of my trip is now completed, and all in all, I must say I am quite satisfied. This expedition began this morning almost an hour later than I had planned, despite my having completed my packing and loaded the Ford with all necessary items well before 8 o'clock. What with Mrs. Clemens and the girls also gone for the week, I suppose I was very conscious of the fact that once I departed, Darlington Hall would stand empty for probably the first time this century, perhaps for the first time since the day it was built. It was an odd feeling, and perhaps accounts for why I delayed my departure so long, wandering around the house many times over, checking one last time that all was in order. It is hard to explain my feelings once I did finally set off. For the first 20 minutes or so of motoring, I cannot say I was seized by any excitement or anticipation at all. This was due, no doubt, to the fact that, though I motored further and further from the house, I continued to find myself in surroundings with which I had at least a passing acquaintance. Now, I had always supposed I had traveled very little, restricted as I am to my responsibilities in the house. But of course, over time, one does make various excursions for one professional reason or another, and it would seem I have become much more acquainted with those neighboring districts than I had realized. For as I say, as I motored on in the sunshine towards the Berkshire border, I continued to be surprised by the familiarity of the country around me. But then, eventually, the surroundings grew unrecognizable, and I knew I had gone beyond all previous boundaries. I have heard people describe the moment when setting sail in a ship, when one finally loses sight of the land. I imagine the experience of unease mixed with exhilaration often described in connection with this moment is very similar to what I felt in the Ford as the surroundings grew strange around me. This occurred just after I took a turning and found myself on a road curving around the edge of a hill. I could sense the steep drop to my left, though I could not see it due to the trees and thick foliage that lined the roadside. The feeling swept over me that I had truly left Darlington Hall behind. And I must confess, I did feel a slight sense of alarm, a sense aggravated by the feeling that I was perhaps not on the correct road at all, but speeding off in totally the wrong direction into a wilderness. It was only the feeling of a moment, but it caused me to slow down. And even when I had assured myself I was on the right road, I felt compelled to stop the car a moment to take stock, as it were. I decided to step out and stretch my legs a little, and when I did so, I received a stronger impression than ever of being perched on the side of a hill. On one side of the road, thickets and small trees rose steeply, while on the other, I could now glimpse through the foliage the distant countryside. I believe I had walked a little way along the roadside, peering through the foliage, hoping to get a better view, when I heard a voice behind me. Until this point, of course, I had believed myself quite alone, and I turned in some surprise. A little way further up the road, on the opposite side, I could see the start of a footpath, which disappeared steeply up into the thickets. Sitting on the large stone that marked the spot was a thin, white-haired man in a cloth cap, smoking his pipe. He called to me again, and though I could not quite make out his words, I could see him gesturing for me to join him. For a moment, I took him for a vagrant, but then I saw that he was just some local fellow enjoying the fresh air and summer sunshine and saw no reason not to comply. "Just wondering, sir," he said as I approached, "how fit your legs were." "I beg your pardon?" The fellow gestured to the footpath. "You gotta have a good pair of legs and a good pair of lungs to go up there. Me, I haven't got neither, so I stay down here. But if I was in better shape, I'd be sitting up there. There's a nice little spot up there, a bench and everything. And you won't get a better view anywhere in the whole of England." "If what you say is true," I said, "I think I'd rather stay here. I happen to be embarking on a motoring trip, during the course of which I hope to see many splendid sights. To see the best before I have even properly begun would be somewhat premature." The fellow did not seem to understand me, for he simply said again, "You won't see a better view in the whole of England, but I tell you, you need a good pair of legs and a good pair of lungs." Then he added, "I can see. You're in good shape for your age, sir. I'd say you could make your way up there no trouble. I mean, even I can manage on a good day." I glanced up the path, which did look steep and rather rough. "I'm telling you, sir, you'll be sorry if you don't take a walk up there. And you never know. A couple more years and it might be too late." He gave a rather vulgar laugh. "Better go on up while you still can." It occurs to me now that the man might just possibly have meant this in a humorous sort of way. That is to say, he intended it as a bantering remark. But this morning, I must say, I found it quite offensive, and it may well have been the urge to demonstrate just how foolish his insinuation had been that caused me to set off up that footpath. In any case, I am very glad I did so. Certainly, it was quite a strenuous walk, though I can say it failed to cause me any real difficulty, the path rising in zigzags up the hillside for 100 yards or so. I then reached a small clearing, undoubtedly the spot the man had referred to. Here, one was met with a bench, and indeed, by a most marvelous view over miles of the surrounding countryside. What I saw was principally field upon field rolling off into the far distance. The land rose and fell gently, and the fields were bordered by hedges and trees. There were dots in some of the distant fields, which I assumed to be sheep. To my right, almost on the horizon, I thought I could see the square tower of a church. It was a fine feeling indeed to be standing up there like that, with the sound of summer all around one and a light breeze on one's face. And I believe it was then, looking on that view, that I began for the first time to adopt a frame of mind for the journey before me. For it was then that I felt the first healthy flush of anticipation for the many interesting experiences I know these days ahead hold in store for me. And, indeed, it was then that I felt a new resolve not to be daunted in respect to that one professional task I have entrusted myself with on this trip, that is to say, regarding Miss Kenton and our present staffing problems. But that was this morning. This evening I find myself settled here in this comfortable guest house in a street not that far from the center of Salisbury. It is, I suppose, a relatively modest establishment, but very clean and perfectly adequate for my needs. The landlady, a woman of around 40 or so, appears to regard me as a rather grand visitor on account of Mr. Faraday's Ford and the high quality of my suit. This afternoon I arrived in Salisbury at around 3:30, when I entered my address in her register as Darlington Hall. I could see her look at me with some trepidation, assuming, no doubt, that I was some gentleman used to such places as the Ritz or the Dorchester, and that I would storm out of her guest house on being shown my room. She informed me that a double room at the front was available, though I was welcome to it for the price of a single. I was then brought up to this room, in which, at that point of the day, the sun was lighting up the floral patterns of the wallpaper quite agreeably. There were twin beds and a pair of good-sized windows overlooking the street. On inquiring where the bathroom was, the woman told me in a timid voice that although it was the door facing mine, there would be no hot water available until after supper. I asked her to bring me a pot of tea, and when she had gone, inspected the room further. The beds were perfectly clean and had been well made. The basin in the corner was also very clean. On looking out of the windows, one saw on the opposite side of the street a bakery displaying a variety of pastries, a chemist's shop, and a barber's. Further along, one could see the street passed over a round-backed bridge and on into more rural surroundings. I refreshed my face and hands with cold water at the basin, then seated myself on a hard-backed chair left near one of the windows to await my tea. I would suppose it was shortly after 4 o'clock that I left the guest house and ventured out into the streets of Salisbury. The wide, airy nature of the streets here give the city a marvelously spacious feel, so that I found it most easy to spend some hours just strolling in the gently warm sunshine. Moreover, I discovered the city to be one of many charms. Time and again, I found myself wandering past delightful rows of old timber-fronted houses, or crossing some little stone footbridge over one of the many streams that flow through the city. And, of course, I did not fail to visit the fine cathedral, much praised by Mrs. Simons in her volume. This Auguste building was hardly difficult for me to locate, its looming spire being ever visible wherever one goes in Salisbury. Indeed, I was making my way back to this guest house this evening. I glanced back over my shoulder on a number of occasions and was met each time by a view of the sun setting behind that great spire. And yet tonight, in the quiet of this room, I find that what really remains with me from this first day's travel is not Salisbury Cathedral, nor any of the other charming sights of this city, but rather that marvelous view encountered this morning of the rolling English countryside. Now, I am quite prepared to believe that other countries can offer more obviously spectacular scenery. Indeed, I have seen in encyclopedias and the National Geographic magazine breathtaking photographs of sights from various corners of the globe, magnificent canyons and waterfalls, raggedly beautiful mountains. It has never, of course, been my privilege to have seen such things at first hand, but I will nevertheless hazard this with some confidence. The English landscape, at its finest, such as I saw this morning, possesses a quality that the landscapes of other nations, however more superficially dramatic, inevitably fail to possess. It is, I believe, a quality that will mark out the English landscape to any objective observer as the most deeply satisfying in the world. And this quality is probably best summed up by the term greatness. For it is true, when I stood on that high ledge this morning and viewed the land before me, I distinctly felt that rare yet unmistakable feeling, the feeling that one is in the presence of greatness. We call this land of ours Great Britain, and there may be those who believe this is somewhat immodest practice. Yet I would venture that the landscape of our country alone would justify the use of this lofty adjective. And yet, what precisely is this greatness? Just where or in what does it lie? I am quite aware it would take a far wiser head than mine to answer such a question, but if I were forced to hazard a guess, I would say that it is the very lack of obvious drama or spectacle that sets the beauty of our land apart. What is pertinent is the calmness of that beauty, its sense of restraint. It is as though the land knows of its own beauty, of its own greatness, and feels no need to shout it out, in comparison to the sorts of sights offered in such places of Africa or America, though undoubtedly very exciting, would, I am sure, strike the objective viewer as inferior on account of their unseemly demonstrativeness. And that's where I'll stop. Lovely to talk into the void to you. I know you're there, but it's always a void of my own face. Again, Happy New Year. If you want to join the club, DM Heath at the Mad Woman's Library or at his page, Heath Amodio. Happy day. Talk soon.